me introduce a guy who was a longtime federal prosecutor, now a defense attorney. He's the great David Katz, everyone. Hello, sir. How are you?
Great to be with you.
So, David, let me just quickly ask you first. There's this insanity about who might occupy a Trump administration that would be filled by loyalists largely, and he would pick up where he left off on the Supreme Court, et cetera. That is sort of presumed. And then I'll get to Musk and the legal issues there. But this story broke just the last couple of days about Eileen Cannon, the judge in Florida, increasingly being in the conversation for a possible attorney generalship under a Trump administration. Can you tell us or remind us who she is and how that might go down?
Yes, well, I think it's Eileen Mercedes Cannon. She was born in Colombia. It's interesting with all of Trump's talk about immigrants. She's an immigrant, but she's an immigrant that he really, really likes. So he found her when she was an assistant U.S. attorney down there in Florida. And then he put her on the bench, actually, after he'd been defeated. This was one of the last things that he did. And I always find it so frustrating that senators, I think, including Feinstein and some others, either voted for her because they said, oh, this will be great. Diversifying the bench, have a woman on the bench. You know, it's a lot more about ideology than identity in my book. Then a lot of senators didn't even bother to vote. So she got confirmed. You know, what's one more district judge around the country? Well, she was in Trump's backyard. And so when Trump was searched at Mar-a-Lago, because he'd taken all those documents he wasn't allowed to have, and then he'd stashed them and hidden them around Mar-a-Lago. And then he got all these inquiries. Finally, he got a subpoena. He had his attorney not tell the government truthfully, according to the evidence, and they showed this to a federal judge. And so they were allowed to get a search warrant. They were allowed to have his attorney testify before the grand jury. And the upshot of all of it is that when the FBI went in there with a duly issued search warrant, they found all these documents that it had been claimed were not even there. They found them hidden in the bathroom, in the ballroom, all of that. Then the case got run up the road by the Trump team to this Eileen Cannon, because this was all handled by a magistrate judge. It was all handled perfectly properly. And the magistrate judge, it would seem, would be the one who would rule on any further questions in the case. But the Trump team ran it up the road to this Judge Cannon, and she ruled in remarkable fashion in Trump's favor, not once, but twice on major issues, including that she thought there should be a special master who should go through all of the documents which had been seized. They couldn't be reviewed even by the government, although they had a proper search warrant. In the interim, there were national security matters in there. People were screaming, we need to know right away what national security matters Trump kept and were in there. No, we had to have a special master, this and that, blah, blah, blah. That case went to the appellate court, Mark, and she was reversed soundly as this being really an egregious decision. Then she made yet another egregious decision in the case. And when push came to shove and the case actually got filed, and a lot of people thought at that point they would avoid Southern Florida because it really didn't make any sense. The venue of this case was most appropriate in Washington, D.C. Trump had taken the documents out of the White House. You could have started your narrative right after he was president. So you wouldn't have the presidential immunity issue. Just start with the day after he was president. He took those documents that ought to be in D.C. out of D.C. or had his minions take them out of D.C. down there. But the special prosecutor decided to file it in the Southern District of Florida, which meant he had a 1 in 3 chance, the way that their wheel works, the way that their selection process works in the judiciary, a 1 in 3 chance of getting Cannon. And people were just stunned. And I guess the special prosecutor's view was that he could convict Trump in front of a jury anywhere because his evidence was so overwhelming that Trump had taken those documents, kept them. There was national security. They had labels right on them showing that they were national security documents. With all of that, he took his chance and boom, the 1 in 3 chance did play out, whatever you want to call it. It went to Cannon, and Cannon has now taken as long as she possibly could with that case, but not really given them grounds to go to the Court of Appeals. All she does is not rule, go slow. Every now and then she rules on something which is so obvious it should have been ruled on in a month or two. She's taken 6 months. And they really she never gave them enough rope to take her to the appellate court a third time, which could have been a basis to remove her in that case. And Mark, the last thing is that then she finally threw the case out, but on a highly technical ground. And that highly technical ground was that supposedly the special prosecutor was not properly appointed under the law. It's a technicality. He apparently wasn't paid properly under the law, is another one of her canards. And all of this has been ruled on in the DC Circuit and arguably by the US Supreme Court. But I say arguably by the US Supreme Court because she takes the position that no, it's only been really decided and overwhelmingly for the government in the DC Circuit. Well, she's not in the DC Circuit. She's not bound by the DC Circuit. She's down there in Southern Florida. And so that's why when Trump goes around to these rallies, Mark, and he says, hey, you know, this case was thrown out, very bad case, very bad people, very bad case, all thrown out. It had nothing to do with the merits or whether he did it or not. And that ruling, this is another Katz, that will be overruled. The special prosecutor is properly appointed. Think of all the cases where the special prosecutor has been appointed for the last years. They're all invalid because of the genius of her legal acumen? No. So it looks like she's nothing but, you know, a patsy for Trump. And to get to your question then, will he appoint her to be attorney general if he wins? And the answer, another Katsadamas, is no. I mean, unless the Senate goes overwhelmingly Republican. There are some Republicans, if it's Democratic, they'll never confirm her. If there's a couple of Republicans that they need, maybe by now Collins and a few others have learned their lesson that you can't just appoint anybody that Trump takes out of a hat. They appointed Kavanaugh, and hopefully Senator Collins has learned from that experience. She's not going to look in Collins's eyes and decide that Collins will not decide that Cannon's a great choice after looking in her eyes. The other thing is that she's got to, at least if he doesn't have his attorney general, throw that case out, and he may get advice to not have his attorney general throw the case out. He may stick with that one, and if he sticks with that one, he wants Cannon, at least until Cannon's recused, disqualified by the higher court, if that were to happen. But until then, she's the judge on his case, and he couldn't be happier. So
that's a great point. Like, why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. She's taking care of him, and why move her? That's a really interesting take. It's not so much that he wouldn't like to have a loyalist as attorney general, but he can find another loyalist. Let's just keep her where she is because she's protecting him. Wow, that's so clever. Now to the legal exposure that Elon Musk may be having as a result of his swing state petition giveaway. It was $1 million he was giving to one person who signs this swing state petition. It was a giveaway, and he actually gave away this $1 million supposedly to, it was a kind of lottery-style giveaway to registered voters, and he's supposed to do it in 7 battleground states, okay? So he did one already that I saw, and now the Department of Justice is looking at this because this is, it would seem, David Katz, illegal, isn't it? Or is it right on the border of legality?
Well, I was joking that the Department of Justice could have put an end to it by making a consent decree with him that instead of $1 million, he would offer that boxy, ugly, new truck. And very few people would then be motivated to go do anything, to go do Musk's bidding then. I think this is illegal. The Department of Justice has pointed out it's illegal. You know, some of the magical thinking that non-lawyers have, and maybe some lawyers have this magical thinking too, is that you can do indirectly what you don't do directly. And no, that's why everything says you can't aid and abet, you can't attempt to commit a crime. All of that is illegal. So the magical thinking that he has is this. The law is clear that you can't pay people to go register other people to vote. But the idea of this is that the condition is that you must be a registered voter. So he wants you to sign a petition. This is the story that you're for the First and Second Amendment, and that from those people who sign the petition, somebody, a lucky signer, will win $1 million. But in order to sign that petition, guess what, Mark? You have to be a registered voter. So the reality is they run around to get people to register to vote so that they can then enter them as registered voters. I think Musk is actually paying some money to do that, which is very, very troubling. I think all the people who do that sort of thing should desist from it. Not that I think they're going to be charged criminally, but I think they should desist from that. And I think that Musk will get the message, and I think that I haven't followed it to the last minute, but I think that he will change the condition rules, or he'll stop doing that, because he's really risking criminal prosecution. There's a precedent. One of Trump's other buddies, this World Wrestling Federation guy, he did something like this, Mark, a few years ago. And the idea was, if you wore a WWF logo or something into the polling place, and he pay you, that was the thing. If you wore it in there, then you would win this prize like that. And they warned him, and he said, "This is so unconstitutional. This is so awful." But guess what? Then he stopped doing it. And I think Musk will, just for self-preservation, because he seems to have shown some terrible judgment. I mean, Tesla's not cool anymore, Twitter, now X, is not cool anymore. How did he ever destroy? Think of those brands that he's on the way to destroying. Someone shows up now with that big boxy Tesla. You don't think, wow, that's so cool. This guy's really energy efficient. You think, yikes, why are they driving this Muskmobile around?
He's particularly reckless, and I think that's what comes with unfettered power. I believe that he has tremendous power already over government. I've said it before on this show that that's what he wants in a Trump presidency, is even more power. And he's already given tremendous power, and also huge tax breaks from our government. But he wants them to be even bigger. So the first three winners were in Pennsylvania, and they have 6 swing states apart from that: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, according to the website that he set up. And
Mark, you have to be registered to vote in one of those swing states, and so therefore you see the motivation is to get people to go register in one of those 7 swing states.
He
and
says
that's what you're not allowed to do. That's what you're not allowed to do. He's trying to do it indirectly. What he knows you can't do directly, you can't do it indirectly either.
And it's interesting, just to that point, David, and then we'll move on. He says, "I'm just looking for people to sign this petition. It's 2 sentences long. The First and Second Amendments guarantee freedom of speech and the right to bear arms. By signing below, I am pledging support for the First and Second Amendments." But as you have noted, but he wants registered voters only. So you have to register to vote to sign that petition, is your point.
Mark,
and that is where you run up against illegality.
Mark, I would strike out the Second Amendment part, because I think that case was wrongly decided 5-4 by the U.S. Supreme Court with Scalia and the others. But I would certainly sign with the excision that I would make and qualify for the $1 million. You'll be stunned to know no one has asked me, because I'm not in one of those 7 swing states. This is almost one of those things like Trump does, in your face, where it's like, I'm going to act like I'm so disingenuous. I'm so stupid. I can't figure this out. And everyone else is saying the emperor has no clothes. Musk has no clothes on this one. This is a violation of the law. He got a letter from the Department of Justice. It's not because it's politicized. It's not weaponization of the DOJ. If you or I had done this, we would have gotten that letter. We would never have been so foolhardy as to have done that. And I think Musk will stop, because his lawyers are telling him, stop already.
As I say, they push it all the way to the line, because, unless the Justice Department does step to them, they can get away with it. In this case, the Justice Department did step up. We talk about the swing states, David, and you just were referencing them. The big thing that's happening in the swing states, as I see it, is the disenfranchisement of voters. These things that are done to repress the people's voice. I wonder if you could speak to that and the legality and methodology behind actually getting rid of voters on the voter rolls in swing states, for example.
Well, I tried to look into the 7 swing states and some of the current issues in the 7 swing states, kind of trying to predict if we're going to have another Bush v. Gore out of this election. And if we do, where it might be. Very hard to predict. One of the things is that despite all the propaganda from Trump and the election deniers, the elections not only were quite clean in 2020, even though we were in the middle of a pandemic and a lot of the systems had to change soon before the election, just to accommodate that people were so scared to go out and so scared to go to the polling place where there was going to be a lot of people and a lot of germs in 2020. But in those 4 years since, while Trump has tried to play havoc where he can, like with the Georgia system, and we can talk about that a little bit in Pennsylvania. Actually, the voting systems in those 7 states, I looked through just about all of them. I listened to what the secretaries of state had to say. They've actually been, they've been made I won't say flawless, but they've tried to deal with some of the flaws. One of them in 2020 was there was suddenly this huge change. They've tried to deal with that, and they're expecting that many of the ballots will be mailed in. Now, a couple of the states haven't accommodated those efforts, Mark, because they have Republicans in the legislature. And so they insist in 2 or 3 of those states that they can't start counting the mail-in ballots until the day of the election, until election day. So what that means is they have to open up those envelopes that come in, the mail-in ballots, right? And they can't open them and count them until election day. So the reality is we will not know, Mark, on election day, unless it's a landslide, who won. And that's, of course, where the mischief comes in, because people are used to, especially older people, are used to seeing, by 11 o'clock, Walter Cronkite or Huntley Brinkley were on the air and they were telling you, or Associated Press, they were telling you who won, right? And that you don't have anymore, and you're not going to have it this year. In fact, the results may be later this year. They may be a day, 2, 3 days later before we know who won. It won't be on election night because they have to open those ballots up, and they can't start opening them in 2 or 3 of the states.
That's the key, that you can't, even though you've had this immense showing, it's like a tidal wave of early voting. Here it is. Brad says that's why the voting went into the morning last election. Can't count votes till day of, he says. So you just noted the strategy, which is somehow you make it close enough that it becomes a situation in which the dead heat becomes nobody gets to 270, and then things begin to default to what will ultimately be a vote in the House. That's the way it works. But on the legality of purging the voter rolls, David, the supervision, the legal supervision associated with shedding so many tens of thousands of voters in states from Georgia to Arizona, is there any supervision? Is there any objective legal supervision on these things?
Well, yes, and that's what I'm trying to say, is that in the swing states, they've really tightened up on that, and they're not allowing, the courts are not allowing these purges to go on. In Arizona, there was this big flap with supposedly 190,000 people were allowed to vote who didn't have picture ID. And the Republicans ran with that, and the Trumpsters, oh my God, you see, it must be 190 illegal aliens that Harris and Biden brought in just for that purpose so they could have them vote in a federal election. They stop them at the border. Oh, that's all nonsense. These are people who had a driver's license before you had to provide a certain amount of identification. And so they were basically grandfathered in. And there's no reason to think that those people are not citizens. The court said, and I think the election commission down there said, there's no reason to think that those people are not citizens. And all those 190,000 people are going to be allowed to vote down there in Arizona. In Pennsylvania, there was just a decision today, because what happens is that some people just drop their ballot off and they don't put it in a little envelope. And in some states, including in Pennsylvania, that actually invalidates your vote. You have to basically, and people shouldn't get so worried out there. Not every state is like that, but you should try to really follow the instructions if you're sending in a mail-in ballot. And one of them is that you have to put it in an envelope in many states. In Pennsylvania, the Republicans tried to not count any of the votes that weren't in the little envelope. I don't know if they thought the people who weren't careful to put their ballot in envelope were more likely to vote Democratic. They probably had some survey, some psychologist that they paid to tell them that. Anyway,
it became a big deal. You're right. Yeah.
The Pennsylvania Supreme Court just ruled right now 4-3, the usual partisan splits on the courts that you see, unfortunately. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court voted 4-3 that for any of those people, they're entitled to get a provisional ballot, and they're entitled to leave the provisional ballot. And if the only failure in the original ballot is that it wasn't in an envelope, they'll count the provisional ballot. The other thing is that the computers are so good. All that Dominion voting nonsense and the ghost of Hugo Chavez and how screwed up all of that, that's all garbage. That's all lies. The computers are working just great. They're counting the vote just great. Hand counting is what injects the errors into it. The computers are counting it great. And so a lot of doubters, they say, oh my goodness, how do you know that those people who send in a mail-in ballot don't go down to the polls and vote a second time? The computers catch all of that. I look back at the swing states. The secretaries of state are sure that they're going to catch that sort of thing. They think that there are all these illegals running around voting. That's one of the big issues in Wisconsin. claiming that these people who are illegally in the country are voting, or that people who are voting in local races, and some people who are not citizens are allowed to vote in local races, somehow they're going to be counted. Well, first of all, I think it's just California, Maryland, and the District of Columbia where people who are not citizens are allowed to vote on local races. So none of that is affecting the swing states. But Wisconsin, which is a swing state, is going through, and they're finding very, very few people in all of those states, as they've not found them in the past, Mark, who are voting when they're not citizens. Who would take the risk of being federally prosecuted and smoked out of their underground existence so they can cast one vote?
I've said it over and over and over again. It makes no sense. Not one. And by the way, not one person falls into that category. We had Greg Palast on the other day. He has a great new movie. It's a documentary called Vigilantes, Inc. It's narrated by Rosario Dawson, and Palast produced it with Leonardo DiCaprio. And there is not one illegal alien, or however you want to call it, illegal immigrant, whatever title you want to, or label you want to assign, that has voted illegally. And this is the fraud that has been so successfully perpetrated that you end up with these aggressive efforts to purge the rolls. That's why this is such a hot issue, David, you know?
Well, another lawsuit, Mark, has been about overseas voters. And this is hilarious. I think in the days of Ronald Reagan, maybe in the days of Nixon, certainly the first time, you would think that overseas voters were voting Republican. I mean, think of who overseas voters are. Now, they know, because they live abroad, how much Trump has tarnished our name, how much he's, really denigrated the reputation of the United States in all of these countries. They apparently now vote overwhelmingly Democratic. So one of the Republican things is to not count the overseas votes, not even to count the overseas military votes. So they seem to have lost that in all 7 states. All of the states are counting the overseas and the military votes, but they have all these specious arguments why supposedly they shouldn't be counted, or those people never lived in the United States. I guess there are some people born on an army base or something, and they've lost all of those.
Exactly, yeah. The arguments are insane. But, you know, this is something that you know a little something about, because since the beginning of voting here in this country, there have been efforts to disenfranchise blocks of voters. And this is just the latest incarnation. It's super high profile, but and it's multifaceted, as you've just kind of noted. There are all these different ways in which they're trying to get rid of and shed the voter rolls of these people. But it's not new.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have Raffensperger down there in Georgia. And Raffensperger, and I believe him, not just because he stood up to Trump and all the other things, but I think he's a real straight arrow. I think he's an example, like when Adam Schiff and I were public servants, of the kind of public servant you want to be. You have your own political party in life, but you try to do your job for the government as impartially and fairly as you can. He hits me as that kind of a fellow. And he said in this interview that I saw, he said that, we've got things so well organized that those lines that made Georgia infamous, the people standing, black people, for 6 hours to vote, and they passed these rules like you couldn't give them water. It was a misdemeanor to give a person water while they were waiting one of those 5 or 6 hour lines in black neighborhoods to vote. He says that really is not going to occur, because they really have put their resources into making sure that doesn't happen. And again, because of the number of people voting by mail and how well organized that is. So hopefully we won't be seeing that in the swing states. So there's 7 of them. North Carolina has a lot of litigation too, that I looked into. And it looks like North Carolina is being pretty well organized. So I know the polling is very, very close in some of those states, but I think it's trending Harris's way. I mean, Trump has made such a fool of himself, worse than a fool, expressing to Kelly. And you say, in a credibility contest, this is the easiest jury question in the world. If you were prosecuting this case in court, you would say, on the one hand, you have the 4-star general, fought for his country, Kelly, the salt of the earth, the guy. Yes, Your Honor, right?
Yeah, his son gave his life in Afghanistan.
And the serial liar on the other. Do I believe that Trump said Why do these suckers and losers fight for the United States? Why do they sacrifice anything to go into uniform? What's in it for them? That Adolf Hitler did a lot of good things. I absolutely trust Kelly, and I believe this is yet another. This is lie number 2,000 or 3,000 in a row, or whatever it is, by Trump. It's awful. How can people vote for that? How can a Republican or an independent or anybody, how can they vote for that? And there is this real fear, Mark. I know other people have said this on your show, and they've said this on other shows. But he does not intend to hold another election. He absolutely does not intend to. He intends to be dictator for life, dictator from day one. If you don't believe me, don't believe any of us. It's out of his own mouth. It's just extraordinary, the things that he says. And then people say, show me he said it. And then you show them that he said it. And then they say, well, he must not have meant it.
Stockholm Syndrome is a strange animal, is why, says True Tech. Maybe there is some Stockholm, you know, around this guy, and you tend to excuse all of these things. Kim, in a second, get to you, but it's remarkable to me that Trump can say these things and people look past them. The other thing I would just say quickly is when you talk about there not being another election, I just want to make the point that I think there'll be other elections if Trump wins. It'll be a soft despotism of the sort that you see in Hungary. Trump will never leave power. J.D. Vance will never leave power. He's the Trump in waiting. And the MAGA movement is so much bigger than Trump now. He is maybe the head of the spear, and the rallying point, but there will be other elections, just as there are in Russia. There are elections in all of these countries that are ruled by despotic autocrats.
Fake ones.
Exactly. They are fake elections. And they may even be close, because close elections sort of suggest, wow, it's legitimate. But the reality is that David's so right. I agree. The MAGA movement and the GOP will be in power for ad infinitum, really. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.